via. Thank you. My name is Bill Zahner, and I am the director of CRIMSI, the Center for Research in Mathematics and Science Education. Our center has been a part of SDSU since 1986, and CRIMSI brings together faculty from the College of Sciences and the College of Education who share an interest in researching STEM education. Our activities include colloquium talks, hosting visiting scholars, and the Distinguished Lecturer Talk every spring. I am pleased to welcome Dr. Bryan Brown from Stanford University as our CRIMSI Distinguished Lecturer. Donna Ross will do a more formal introduction in a moment. I do want to pause and just recognize this event takes many people to plan and pull together. And I want to thank Deb Escamilla, Candy Cabral, Donna Ross, our graduate student reps, Kristen Tenney and Isabel White, our undergraduate assistants, Tori, Aina, and Natalia, the committee of CRIMSI representatives who helped put together and plan this event, the donors who funded this event and underwritten our work, and last but not least, the deans of the College of Sciences and College of Education who are our partners in this work. And with that, I'll hand it off to Dr. Barry Chung from the College of Sciences, and then Dr. Jeff Roberts. I went out of order. Dr. Jeff Roberts from the College of Sciences, and Dr. Barry Chung from Education to say a brief welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Donna, and thank you to all of you who worked to put this event on this afternoon. I am so pleased to be here this afternoon and so excited to have the opportunity to welcome Dr. Bryan Brown from Stanford, CRIMSI's 2023 Distinguished Lecturer to campus. Dr. Brown, we are so honored that you're visiting us this afternoon. I will confirm that CRIMSI is absolutely indispensable to our university's efforts to facilitate and support research in mathematics and science education. And as Barry will also explain, I'm sure, CRIMSI is one of SDSU's crown jewels in effective cross-disciplinary collaboration. We have very few centers that span across colleges, and this is one of the few between the College of Sciences and the College of Education. There's so much going on. Dr. Brown, given your scholarly interests, I think you might be interested to hear a little bit about our efforts over the past few years to grow San Diego State University's community of scholars who work in mathematics and science education. I'm especially proud of the efforts we've made over the past few years to really expand the disciplinary footprint across the college significantly beyond mathematics. Several years ago, we hired Regis Comperta, who is here someplace, a campus educator. And over the last couple of years, we recruited our first biology education faculty member and our first computer science education faculty member, Gina Spaglia and Miranda Parker. And I'm guessing at least one of them is in the Zoom room. I don't see them here this afternoon. And I'm pretty confident, because I'm the dean and I decide these things, that we'll see more such faculty hiring over the next few years, including next year when I think the odds are high, although it's not confirmed, that we'll be able to do a search in the area of statistics or data science education. So we're growing. I also want to make the point about how important CRIMSI is to our university's strategic plan. We talk a lot about our R1 aspirations, which excite me for sure, but we don't talk enough about how that particular goal is situated under a broader umbrella that calls for embracing our identity as a minority-serving institution with an unwavering commitment to public-facing scholarship, exactly the kind of work done by CRIMSI researchers, and just the kind of scholarship that I know Dr. Brown will share with us this afternoon. So for that reason, among others, it's so very, very appropriate that CRIMSI selected Dr. Brown as this year's Distinguished Lecturer. So I've so appreciated the opportunity to say a few words this afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Brown, for traveling to San Diego from Palo Alto today. Usually the weather is nicer down here than it is up there, but sorry. And thanks to all of you for working so hard to ensure that every single student is served by our efforts to promote science and mathematics learning. What a calling. Thank you. Enjoy the lecture, and I will now ask my colleague Barry Chung to come up.
Good evening, everyone. It's such a pleasure being here with you today. And I want to say those who are on Zoom, you're missing out a very nice spread of refreshment that we're enjoying here in person. I want to thank Dr. Bryan for coming down all the way from Palo Alto, Stanford University. It's such a treat to have your expertise, your experience sharing with us today. And I want to mention that this is such a wonderful collaboration between two colleges, Sciences and Education. We have MSED and we have CRIMSI. And this lecture is organized by CRIMSI. But I want to mention MSED. I just met a student from MSED, right? Sitting right there. And he'll be graduating next year. And I'm wishing him best wishes when he engages in job search, right, this fall. It's a wonderful collaboration between two colleges, and I often tell people it's no secret that CRIMSI is a model center of our college and sciences. They bring in so much research funding. They have all the wonderful faculty members from the two colleges, and they're doing impactful research. They even have a very nice logo. I think it's pie, isn't it? And I had a button that they actually made a button with a pie as a logo. It's very meaningful work, and that reminds me of my own experience as a student. I want to tell you though, my strongest subjects in high school were mathematics and biology. And I love mathematics. In fact, I was so crazy about calculus that I had some geek friends, maybe 3 or 4 of us. We spend about 3 or 4 hours a day working on calculus. We often surpass the teacher's pace. We always go a few chapters in advance to do the mathematics over there because we just love calculus. And it has prepared me well for my career, even though I'm in psychology. I'm still using mathematics. And I don't use too much of biology these days, but I used to use some of that in my psychology classes. And I recall my experience as a student, and some of my best teachers in mathematics and sciences were female teachers. I want to acknowledge them because they have inspired me. They have given me a world view that STEM is not the male discipline, it's for everyone, and have female role models who help me look at science and mathematics in a different way. So I want to thank people before me who prepared who I am today. And of course, coming to America, I'm exposed to even more diversity. And I'm experiencing diversity in terms of racial ethnic backgrounds, which I didn't have before in Hong Kong. And I also recognize the diversity in making mathematics and sciences. So I want to recognize all the mathematicians, scientists, who are persons of color. And we have a speaker today sharing his experience with us. That is wonderful, that is inspiring, because we all can work with each other on advancing our well-being by way of sciences and mathematics. And everyone contributes something, and I'm really enjoying the life here celebrating diversity in math and science. So I look forward to Dr. Bryan's lecture, and thank you for having me today.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. And for those of you online, thank you for being here as well. It's my great honor to introduce Dr. Bryan Brown, who is a professor of science education at Stanford, a former associate dean, and currently the chair. So you know he's a brave guy, right? Associate dean, chair, but he's the chair of the interdisciplinary program, and I need to read the name of it, Race, Inequality, Language, and Education, which brings together over 50 faculty members. He has a degree in biology. Can I get a woo-woo for biology? He worked as a high school biology teacher for many years and still uses that to help inform his teaching and scholarship. And now, with almost 20 years at Stanford, he teaches a variety of classes, including a series of science education classes. That word series got me really excited. And also research courses and courses that focus on diversity and identity. His research is around the complexities of students' interests, identity, and trajectories in science, particularly focused on the intersection of race and gender. The factors influencing students' experiences are multifaceted and super complex. And this is one of the reasons that his writing is so interesting. So if you haven't had a chance to read the things that he writes, I really encourage you to do that. He has lots of scholarly articles, but he also has a book that's used in a lot of science methods courses. It's an award-winning book called Science in the City. He is also, I'll just note, a proud parent of 2 teenagers, one of them who heads off to college next year. And he's also just a really nice and gracious person. So we are very happy that he's here. Will you help me give him a warm welcome?
All right. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Bill, for having me. I have a challenge. So let me say, I hope this is the first of many conversations that we have together. I am hypocritical if I stand here and blabber at you for an hour, right? If anything that I do professionally is true, I can't do it. So we're going to have a conversation. So here's what I'm asking. For my 58 friends in digital land, if you can go to nearpod.com, nearpod.com, and I am going to ask you to join this lesson. So go to nearpod.com. You're going to click join as a student. And I told Bill what I was going to do is to try to do 3 things at once, kind of teach you some things, model what's possible so you get a sense of what's possible, and then share some research. So I'm going to try to, I've already committed to doing too much, right? It can't go well, but at least I'll give it a shot. If you get logged out, the code is always in the top right here. So nearpod.com and the code FI38X. So here's the deal. Today, I want to really make an argument, and the argument is that it's our fault, right? It is our fault that students fail at STEM, that students feel that STEM is not a place for them. And I'm also going to give you good news. And the good news is that we are the ones who can change this in a very, very simple way. The secret sauce in the S in STEM science is that I don't care who you are, you love it when you experience it, right? So get logged in, and we're going to give it a shot. So today I want to talk to you about teaching and learning, language, culture, and technology. I want to argue you know a bunch already about learning. I would argue that many of us don't teach how learning works. So quick things. Across all racial and ethnic groups, women in STEM earn less than their male counterparts. You knew it already that there's a gender bias, right? But I wanted you to look at a couple other items. STEM jobs, what does that number say there? You see it? Third box. Median salary, $77,000. All other jobs around 50, and these are with college degrees. And so you knew this already, but a way for people to have greater financial success is to join STEM jobs, right? I hear there's a rumor that you have a pretty strong biotech community in Southern California. Maybe that's just me. I hear a rumor that in Northern California, where I'm from, there's pretty strong technology sector, right? So why are we flying in people from all over to the world to do the very jobs that sustain our natural economy? So I'm arguing a place like San Diego State can literally seed every university, every professional place in the country because you have an incredibly diverse student population if you just graduated those students. So the good news is that it's your fault, all right? The bad news is that it's your fault. But ultimately, you can change things. And so quickly, I came across this and I laughed, and then it was not funny. Half of Americans think young people don't pursue STEM because it's too hard. Here's a question for you. First thing I'm going to ask you to do, let me hide your names. Oops, that's not hiding your names. That will hide your names. Tell me, which of the following best describes why students perceive STEM to be too difficult? Give me your answer. Anywhere, yeah. What I'm also trying to do is to model how you can engage your students all at once using technology. Just put it in. So go to nearpod.com, log in, put that code in, and we're all gonna be participating. And I don't know if you noticed, but I'm controlling your digital device. You can go to YouTube, but I'm gonna snatch you right back with me. So that's one of the cool things about this software. So stay with me, I need more answers. For those of you who can't see it, can someone read out what was option A? One of the options, reasons why students don't like STEM, what was it? Complicated, it's just complicated. What's the second option? It's the kids' fault, right? They're just not ready because of elementary. Third option. It's our fault. And the fourth option, what was the fourth option? Society's fault, right? So what's the answer? 78% of you got it right. Well, you know, I'm just playing with you. I'm blaming you so we can make a point here. So there is no right answer, but here we go. Half of Americans say people don't pursue STEM degrees because of the difficulty of the subjects, and so it's affirmative. But watch this. 7.2% of all STEM degrees come from African Americans. Over 40% of those come from historically Black colleges and universities. So let me make sense of this, right? Only 11% of African Americans go to these universities. That means, I'm sorry, 11%. So that's what, 89%? Come on, math people, stay with me. 89% of the people go somewhere else. But of that 89%, the 11% are far more likely, 4 times more likely to have earned an advanced degree, but that's not enough. That 11% tend to have lower GPAs and lower SAT scores, and here's why. Because if you're a 4.2 African American and you have great SATs and you apply to Harvard, Yale, so you see where I'm going, you're more likely to get funding. It is cheaper for you to go to PWI. So how are the lower performing 11% outperforming the 89%? Say with me, 980,000 people graduate with STEM degrees. 30% of people who take that first STEM class, it's our fault. They're gonna fail that class. I got a solution. So I'm not blaming you, I'm just playing around. Relax. We're going somewhere. So here we go. One of my favorite things is the say it out loud test. Here's the say it out loud test. If I say it out loud and it's still a bad idea, I'm not gonna do it. So say it out loud is important. So I'm gonna say out loud some assumptions. Number one, science is for the intellectually elite. It's a bad idea. Really? So you have to be smarter than everyone that knows science? Number two, those who learn messed that up completely. Those who did not learn science, I'm gonna let the math people off for a few minutes, but I'm coming back for you. Those who did not learn science were not smart enough to understand it. It's a bad idea. Science is a subject matter for the socially awkward. They have entire television shows about that, right? And lastly, science teachers are just too smart to simplify or dumb down the content so that everyone can learn. Here's what we're doing. We're hiding our poor instruction behind the idea that it's just too hard. And we're saying, well, I'm just too smart to teach it, right? So let's just shift the assumptions. How about this? Science is for everyone. Understanding science helps everyone. If we didn't learn anything from the pandemic, we need to know it's our fault. We need a deep understanding of science. Number two, if students do not understand science, we have not taught it well. Let me just say for a second, if I teach you and you get 70% of the information, you get a C, and I say, okay, we're done. That means I don't care that you miss the other 30% of the information, right? Think about the paradigm that puts forward, right? So why don't we just set benchmarks, everyone to understand these concepts? We'll iterate our way through expertise. Science is a subject people from every background should be gifted at understanding, but we have alternative assumptions. And lastly, how about this? Science teachers are so smart that they can relearn the content in a way that empowers everyone to learn. If you're smart, how about you be smart enough to teach it well, right? We just need to change our assumptions. So my argument is that part of what happens is that learning is easy, right? But teaching is hard. So I'm gonna give everyone a pass because no one taught you how to teach. But learning is easy and teaching is hard. So let's talk about learning. I studied with social linguists and they blew my mind. There's a language culture that happens in every environment. Let me just I'm gonna prove myself right here. I walk into an elevator, there are language culture rules in the elevator. Which direction do I stand? Stay face the door. And can I ask you how you're doing? Can I start telling you about my day? Right? Don't talk to me, right? We must have went in the same elevator, right? So there are there's a culture to every language environment. When I say, hey, how are you? You understand I'm not really asking you how you're doing. I'm saying hello. So you tell me back, hey, how are you? And it's done. No details, greeting, right? So here's the language culture of a classroom. You show up to biology, you show up to chemistry, you show up to engineering, and you know the one thing you don't know? Because you showed up to learn it, right? Biology, chemistry, and engineering. So then the teacher asks you a whole bunch of questions about biology, chemistry, and engineering. And you're expected to have the right answer and then communicate that right answer in scientific language. Here's the irony. If you get it wrong, the teacher will say, okay, interesting. And you. It's just rude. It's a rude way to communicate, especially when you know that the person who knows is leading the conversation. In K through 12 environments, there's another game that's played. It's kind of funny to me. Teachers will ask students a question. The students will ask the teacher a question. The teacher will say, interesting. And they'll turn to another student and ask that student. That teachers in K-12 environments are trying to get everybody to talk because there's something powerful about talking. The best way to go from I know it, I messed that up, to I don't know it, to I know it, is to talk about it so often that you gain some version of clarity. But in a science classroom, who's doing the talking? Come on. Who's that? Who's that? The teacher. So science classrooms have to have a different language culture. It's simple. If I want students to learn, students have to talk, right? So are we teaching how learning happens? So let me ask you a very simple question. I need an answer. How do people learn? I'm up against a Lizzo concert, so I need everybody to give me these answers as quickly as possible. We gotta go. We gotta go. If I said, there's a song that says, she's just a small town girl living in a, what is the next line? Right, lonely world, trying to take a midnight train to, how do you know that song? Did you study it? It is kind of a cultural requirement to know the lyrics to the Journey songs. It is, right? But how does that happen? None of us went to Journey class. All right, so here we go. Someone says, multiple ways. Listening is learning, talking is learning, doing. Someone else says, let me get a couple more answers. Pictures, experiences, connections, and engagement. Connecting to prior experiences, building mental schema and metacognition. There we go. Good, good. Hands-on activities. Engage with others to express their ideas. By engaging with content in a way that it relates to their lives. We know about the things we need to know about. People learn from thinking on their prior beliefs and asking questions to challenge their beliefs. So we need to start where the students are. So let me, right, I'm trying to model what's possible. I can get 35 voices real time, right? 35 explanations real time before I ever start to explain anything, right? We're in a new era. So here's the challenge. I want you to take a look at this image. Let me see if it pops up. Imagine this person. You're in your class and the professor, I'm gonna just go to chemistry, no picking on my chemistry people here. There's an idea being explained and it hits me, I'm not understanding what's going on, right? I don't understand what's going on. So here's the question. What happens for students when they have that experience? Something is being explained, I don't understand. Really quick. Oh, someone says, I'm not cut out for this. So not understanding means I shouldn't be here. I'm shamed, embarrassed. I feel dumb. I'm scared to ask in front of the whole class. Ironically, I pay tuition. I literally pay to be here. But I can't ask a question because why would I be able to ask a question? I think you see where I'm headed. I give up. Right, this goes back to our assumptions. All right, so if I were teaching for real, I would make sure I get to 100% just to see everybody and where we're headed. But we gotta go quick. So I wanna make an argument that learning is absolutely cognitive, but it is powerfully psychological. That learning is absolutely cognitive, meaning our brains, these computers on our shoulders are world class. They are incredible if presented an opportunity, download, retain, and use it. And lastly, is deeply social. So here's the question. Are we teaching in a way that learning happens? And so let me start by sharing some research. Incredible work done out of Arizona State by Micheline Shi or Mickey Chi and Brenda Fonseca documents the most efficient modes of learning. So at the very bottom, the least efficient is passive, what I'm doing right now. I'm blabbering, you're listening, that doesn't work well. Yet it's what we've been doing for centuries. And we even got digital tools and said, you know what we should do? Let's videotape blabbering, put it online and let them blabber, right? It's still passive instruction. It is not what I do. Otherwise, all we need is the most brilliant speaker to offer explanations of the concepts, right? There has to be something embedded in what the students do. So that is active learning. So if I have to write down what is being told to me, that is the second in the efficiency ladder. And so they've done 20 years of studies documenting that if you compare students who just listen versus students who listen and take notes, then the note takers do better. You know that. I'm not telling you anything new. Where it goes beyond that is the next is constructive, also known as the self-explanation effect. If I have to explain it in my own words, that is a higher order thinking task because I need to understand the information and translate it to my own voice. What the research says is those students who have to explain it to themselves become most efficient. I believe there's a group of people who said, I thought it was you, that those who teach it is teaching produces their understanding. Was that you? Okay, a different group of people in the same room. But teaching is the ultimate exercise of learning, because if I have to explain it, three things happen. Either I know that I know, or I know that I don't know at all, or I know this part and this other part is unclear to me. Great places to be, right? How many times in the classroom we offer young people the opportunity to explain what they understand? Most days it's zero. So they get to the test, which is the first explanatory opportunity, and they realize I know this, but this is unclear. It just needed to happen during the classroom, if that makes sense. Because teaching forces you to recognize your level of understanding. This is called the self-explanation effect, or constructive. The highest in the hierarchy of learning, according to Fonseca and Chi, is interactive. And this is the idea, if the group of us work together to explain, then collectively we will retain that information at much higher levels, right? So here's the question: are we teaching in the way that learning is happening? So if in 1800, a person stood in front of a classroom and lectured for an hour as the mode of instruction, and we have not learned much more, we are failing our young people by continuing this process when we know a lot about how learning works. So let me move. So just from a purely cognitive space, there's some things jump out. Number one, you just learned about the self-explanation effect. Classrooms should be explanatory environments. Kids explaining. If that means it's a loud environment, you can use a digital tool, have the kids explain real time. There's a ton of work in that space. I'll move from that. Space recall. Jeff I'm messing his name up. Sorry, Jeff. Karpicki and Cal Newport suggest if you have to explain something, you stop. Then you have to explain it later. You retain that information at a higher level. Now think about it. The reason is I know that I need to use the information, so I'll download it and store it. Let me give you a practical example. If I am giving people directions to my home and I have to do that regularly, I remember the names of those streets more than the names of streets that I don't have to describe. Now, you're looking at me funny, like, when's the last time I had to give directions to my house? And I wanted you to do that because you used to be able to until your smartphone included GIS software and everyone else's, and you deleted that information, right? Because all unused information will get deleted. And so the work here on speed recall suggests, space recall, that if we give students opportunities to explain, and then we revisit and give them another opportunity to explain after some hours, they have greater retention. So for example, explaining in class, doing some homework where you have to explain, you come back to the next session, quick explanatory activity. Think about it. If I explain and explain and explain again, three outcomes. I know that I know that I don't know, or I know this part, but this other part I understand that I don't know. That is a beautiful place to be. You're looking at me funny, but we're getting here. All right, the next thing, we have a maximum cognitive capacity. We can't remember everything. We will delete all unused information. Do you remember your best friend's phone number? Promise you don't. Nothing personal. You're great people. I met you. You're a good group of people. You only remember that, holy crap, I'm in trouble. I need to call this number. And that is probably a parent, a spouse. We don't use unnecessary information. So at a cognitive level, here's what that means. Number one, repetition equals retention. You know Journey because you heard the lyrics over and over and over. The second, right, is valued information becomes the information that we retain. Here's the problem with teaching and learning. I, as a teacher, you can't tell the kids in the classroom that all the information is important because it's just not, right? So the value has to be in how do we create lots of opportunities for them to explain towards mastery. Now, there's a psychological component that is separate, is different from what we do in math and science. And so Danny Martin, I'm going to talk a little bit about his work, Bandura's work, and Claude Steele's work. You noted and picked up on it immediately. So for example, one of the things that's frightening about the work in math is a psychological history. Danny Martin's work suggested if I give kids two different problems, one group, well, everybody's going to get the same condition. One a hard problem, one easy problem. But the parents have different histories. If my parent has a positive history, you give me a problem that is difficult, I say the problem is difficult. If the parent had, I'm completely messed that up. Let me try over again. If the parents had a positive relationship with mathematics, easy problem, difficult problem, they do the easy problem, they get to the hard problem, they realize, okay, this is a hard problem. If the parents had a difficult history with math, easy problem, hard problem, they get to the hard problem, they say, I cannot do math. It becomes an attribution of self. And this translation is something that we need to be aware of. And so part of the psychological component of teaching and learning in science and math is that we have a different burden, that the competence that students operate with is important for us to think about. I'm going to stay there for a second. The self-efficacy theory from Bandura suggested that if I don't believe that I can do it, I'm literally taking up cognitive space. And so the analogy I like to use is that many of you have tried to parallel park your car. You're great at parking cars, I'm sure. The music was on, it was loud. And to clear some cognitive space, you just turned it down, right? So think of it this way. If you don't have confidence, the music is playing in your ear as the teacher who is not trained to teach is blabbering these chemistry ideas. And now it's more difficult for me to understand what was already difficult. And if my parents had a positive history, that's just difficult. But if my parents had a negative history, I don't know if I can do this. Right? Does that make sense? So I'm trying to pull these things together. And there's a third, and this is from Claude Steele. It's both frightening and amazing. This notion of stereotype threat. If there is a negative stereotype about who I am, then what happens is it reduces my cognitive capacity and I perform worse. A very famous research. Claude Steele discovered this and he developed this program in Michigan called WISE. Here's what he did. He lied to the kids. There was a remediation program and he said, look, this is for honor students, excellent students. You're going to perform better. He turned the music down. Those students performed better on the academic performances at their time at the University of Michigan, had a higher GPA than any other group of students. So building confidence is important. You already knew that. But if we have cognitive challenges and psychological challenges, we cannot ignore them, right? But let me take a look at the data here. This is a work from Nalani Ambati, who inverted this process. So what if I could cue positive stereotype threats? So she had elementary school students color pictures. The pictures were obviously Asian, just a generic picture, or obviously a girl. Take a look. Which column is highest performance? The white for lower elementary, meaning this. For everybody in this study, if you cued a positive stereotype threat, Asianness, without mentioning it at all, the girls did better at math. It's frightening. Now, it didn't matter what group you belonged to. It was for those who identified as Asian and who did not. But cueing positiveness produced better learning outcomes, right? If you take a look at the middle, upper elementary, right? Cueing gender performance, positively saying girls do better at math, cued it positively. So here's what I want to get you to. This idea that you can communicate who's supposed to be here and it improves learning is a psychological barrier that we all must deal with. And last but not least is learning is easy, right? I want to talk about acquisition versus learning. When I need to learn it, I will learn it because I need to. This is why teaching is so important. The task of teaching produces the necessity to understand. When you get to the point where you don't understand, you go and get needed information and you retain that information. In a classroom, if I am talking, teacher, and the students are sitting quietly, then the only person learning is the teacher. So why don't we just simply invert those things? More importantly, if we talk about the things that are important to my life, the things that I see most regularly, I cannot forget those things. I always use the example of if I teach you about osmosis and I talk about, well, water's moving from one side of the membrane to the other side of the membrane, blah, 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 blah. It's irrelevant. But if I say, well, why the heck would they spray those dead vegetables at the grocery store? The vegetables have been dead for a long time. Why are they spraying them? Well, they're spraying them so that osmosis can do its magical work of moving back across the semi-permeable membrane to make those fruits and vegetables look like they're alive, right? Here's what I've done. I changed the way you see the grocery. cannot go back to the grocery store and not see osmosis, right? Repetition equals retention. The more valuable the information is, the greater it is for me to retain it. So here we go. This idea of, you heard this before, this measurement argument, acquisition argument we make about carpenters. And here's what they say. I'm going to measure twice and cut once, right? So if you have any carpenters in your family or construction people, they're phenomenal at adding fractions because their livelihood depends on not making mistakes. So you don't have to teach them fractions. All you need to do is have them build things, because the task of building requires adding fractions. And guess what you get good at? Adding fractions, right? So acquisition is creating tasks that produce mastery. So here we go. Very simple. How are we teaching if this is how learning happens? You know the answer. We're blabbering, students are listening. So we got to teach how learning works. Students need to be talking, explaining, evaluating. The teacher needs to be a personal trainer, supporting the students in this process of understanding, failing, and revising. Now, I'm going to share some studies that we did to kind of think through this process. And one of those barriers for us was that oftentimes you've been here, you've been in an academic environment, the use of complicated language. You walk in the room, there's more new words in an introductory biology class than there are in an introductory Spanish class. And this volume of terminology produces some anxiety and stress. And so we basically said two conditions. One group, we explained the water cycle using academic language. The other, we just took the language out, made it as simple as possible. So one group is like talking about expanding bond lengths of it's water in its gaseous form. The other is just water's changing shapes, just simple words. Now watch, exact same number of words. My doing in voiceover, we had the kids come into the room, watch the video, and then we gave them a stress test. So here's a stress test. We borrowed methods from psychology. We gave them the Stroop and the flanker test. And so the Stroop test is if the word red is written in the word with the letter R, you have to push the corresponding letter of the color, right? So these are what are called congruent. But if red is written in blue, now I had to ignore what it said, and I needed to push the B button because now I have two cognitive distractor, right? It's an easy thing to do, but it requires more focus. You have to ignore the distractor. Similarly, the flanker task, you have to identify the arrow in the center. Notice this arrow is pointing the opposite direction, so similar task. I have to ignore the distractors and focus on what was centered. Now, I only did one thing. One group got simple language first. The other group got complex language. I gave them the stress measures, and here's what we found. I want you to note treatment group, 1,300 milliseconds to identify incongruent Stroops. That means when the colors didn't match, they were 1,300 milliseconds, and the control group was much slower, right? And these are statistically significant with an effect size of 0.7. I'm talking about a really short intervention. This whole study took 10 minutes, right? The second, on the flanker items, when it's incongruent, meaning the arrow is going the opposite direction, 690 milliseconds versus 1,000 milliseconds, right? Think a huge effect size. And so the arrow one was even more difficult. But here's the bad news. For any measure, the students who got the simple language were faster in their recognition. And so what we're documenting is that the use of complicated language is producing a limited working capacity. The music is playing really loud in their ears. So my mom laughs at me because she says, what do you do for a living? And as I tell scientists to use clear language so the kids can learn, right? I've just proven that if you use clear language, they will be less stressed and can understand it better. And what are the mediating factors? So we ran a regression analysis to identify what are the primary predictors. Only one mattered, is age. The older you were, the less it mattered. It was still significant for our 17-year-olds. They were better at getting through the complex language. Is that good or bad news? Talk to me. It's good if you're teaching seniors, right? Exactly. And I don't want anybody to be good at suffering, right? It doesn't help that you get better at dealing with the difficulty. I want it to be easy for everyone, right? So the point is we create these really complicated cognitive tasks that don't reflect what we know about learning. So I got a long way to go, short time to get there. So here we go. Number one, simple recommendations, be explicit about language. Let's make it clear. If I don't understand, if I say something you don't understand, then what we can do is use simple language to get the idea first and then let them practice the language second. Number two, creating formative assessments. And here's what that means for those of you who may not know. In instruction, they need lots of opportunities to explain, to explain again, to explain again. And they don't need to get penalized for it, because if you explain, and I hate to say it again, three things happen. Either I know that I know, or I know that I don't know, or I know this part and the other part is unclear. Every instructional opportunity should be rich with formative assessment. And number three, rethink your language assumptions. Value the wrong answer. Use trans language. You have multilingual students in your class, let them use the language practices, because talking about it produces mastery, right? So we're gonna go left now. If it wasn't left enough, we're going all the way left. So the first thing I wanna say is, like, it's amazing what our computers do on our shoulders, right? You deleted all of your phone numbers without being told to do so. You're bad at giving directions now without deleting on purpose that information. So what happened? I blame Apple. I had a Trio. It didn't happen when I had the Palm Trio. It didn't happen until I can literally scroll, hit a button, but we deleted all of that unused information because that's what happens to our brains, right? We don't use the information anymore. But here's the question. Young people are walking around with computers that are more powerful than the computer I had in high school, than the computer I had in college. And we tell them, don't use them in the classrooms. You're communicating with me, some of you, tablet, some of you using a cell phone, and I can engage everybody in the classroom with the digital device. So we've been studying how you can use digital devices to create diversity and context for learning. So I'm gonna give you some quick examples. So instead of walking into a classroom and teaching students about macromolecules, we created a lesson, and that lesson is the truth about flaming hot Cheetos, right? So click play, it'll play on your side, I believe. I'm really talking to those of you online. Hit play, hopefully it works. And for us here it goes. So created VR 360, if we use cardboard goggles, students are taken into a local barbershop and they're able to hear a debate. I think this is what this, yeah, the debate. Because the audio is turned off, then you can't hear it, but you can hear your side. So the audio, I can turn it on?
There are times really hungry. One day, I was in the barbershop when I heard people arguing about what was the right thing. One person that we should never eat flaming hot Cheetos. They said we should be fruit. The other person said that flaming hot Cheetos was not that bad. There were actually some good things. What do you think?
Here we go. We're creating a situation in which we expect the students to be flaming hot Cheetos. I now need them to be macromolecule scientists. Tell me about carbohydrates, nucleic acids, fats, and lipids. I'm missing something. What am I missing? Proteins. Thanks for your help, biologists. Right? So we want to teach them this to answer this question. So we use the virtual environment, and then we gave them assessment. There's different kinds of energy sources. A being a producer, B being a decomposer, and C being I need you to know that you belong. So if I take you into the barbershop, the people look like you don't have to ask about it. If the music that's in the video is representative of the music that you belong to, then maybe I've reduced some of that psychological barrier as well. And so we're intentionally adding diversity to the digital tools so that students get a sense of belonging, right? And then the final assessment, did you learn what we wanted you to learn? So literally taking students into their local liquor store and have them analyzing the health and applicability of the nutrients available in their local liquor store. Here's what it looks like. Now, here's the point of learning. If they see it in the lesson, they go into any grocery store, I've now empowered them to be a local expert on the science of food in their local community. I'm teaching in the context so that they become experts in the place that they live. Music, absolutely. Right. We're trying to use Kendrick Lamar to say you're supposed to be here. So here's the question: what happened? We had 3 classrooms, alternating practices, and some interesting things happened. And so what you'll see is on the far right, all students is that we use a pre-post measure of students' attitudes about science. Could we impact them with the digital tool? And what we found was not really. Students who were highly interested pre-test, and so we did a median on the post-test. Were they interested in science? Still interested in science. Where we found impact is those who communicated before the lesson, I'm not really interested in science, are now statistically significantly more interested in science as a post-test measure. So something about being able to experience it and seeing it produced a difference for not every student, but those students who demonstrated that they were not really interested in the pretest. We replicated this. So we did a 3-iteration version of this, 3 trials across the country, and we found the exact same process. We had huge impacts for students who no longer, who entered instruction seeing themselves as disconnected from the science. They always left seeing themselves as a part of the scientific community. So why would that matter? Well, if we want to make sure students get access to science and feel comfortable, and we want them to see it as valuable. So one thing that students can't say is that science is not a valuable part of who I am and the community that I belong to, because we now used a virtual tool to take them into their own neighborhood. Virtual reality tends to take students out of the context of the neighborhood to distant places. But what does that tell you about your block? It's not a place where science happens. We've inverted it. We took it to their neighborhood and said, here's how science matters at home. Last thing I want to share, and we'll have time for questions, is we did this again more recently. We did a design experiment with classrooms locally in Northern California to look at virtual field trips. So now, what if I can take you to a distant place like Tanzania to show you how they're engaged in environmental restoration, biodiversity work, reforestation to impact and change climate change in the continent of Tanzania.
My name is Bryan Brown, and I am coming to you from Mount Kilimanjaro, here in the beautiful country of Tanzania, the continent of Africa. And I'm coming on behalf of the Science in the City Research Group to share a little bit today about environmental conservation. Take a look around. We are
This is a reforestation project where they're planting trees. Gives you your location and height.
Yeah, so we put dirt in it, and we have to make sure there's like no pocket tight. Can they see? Yeah, we pack it tight. And then they're gonna plant seeds in it, and then it'll grow like over there. And we're trying to plant as many trees as we can to have like more trees, which we need. Yeah, it's deforestation is a thing.
My favorite line, because deforestation is a thing, indeed. So these are, we use Google Cardboard boxes. They can be bought for about $3, and so the image is 10 by 10. The peripheral vision in this box is much bigger and more expansive. But then what the kids get to do is actually see the stages of the seedlings and then how they're planting throughout. So then the assignment we give them is to go home, identify how this is happening locally. What does it mean for your community? So we are using virtual field trips to give students access to places across the world, to see students like them engaged in actual research, to then ask them, how do you do this work in your own neighborhood? And I'm gonna close by showing you really quickly, we did a subsequent analysis document how students responded to this, and what we found with the 58 students was that they were really able to translate the ideas. And so some macro categories. They talked about what they found in the video I didn't show you about animal behaviors, how the environment in Tanzania, where they kept the environmental protection agency, I'm sorry, that's not what they call it there, but their environmental government, it prevents people from developing. And so in the Ngorongoro crater, you have this incredible biodiversity because they're able to keep it protected. And so students talked about how the animals were there. They talked about the biodiversity of the animals. They talked about carbon dioxide behaviors and what that meant. So it says we're learning about climate change. and reforestation, and it's kind of connected back because it helps us understand climate change and global warming because the trees can absorb the carbon dioxide, right? So they start to talk about how it all connects together. And they then talked about the kind of things that they learned, the interactive features of the digital tools. They talked about just how joyful it was to learn in a digital context. I want to get to some quotes. One student says, usually we learn in a cluster and we just look at the same slides and do a worksheet, but here we got to interact with it. The learning process was like I'm putting on VR goggles and finding everything. So there's a lot more interactive. Instead of just listening to lectures, maybe doing some experiments, but there wasn't much of the interaction like how we normally learn. We just like watch videos and stuff and like talk about it. And the virtual reality obviously is virtual reality. You get to see it in what it's like in the virtual reality. You're learning in the place, you're seeing that you're actually in the environment. It's more hands-on and you're able to view it with your eyes. And if you have more of a picture memory, it helps you better learn. So you kind of get a sense of how students were responding to these digital tools. Now, why this is important. 84% of the kids are walking into the classrooms today with smartphones in their pockets. But what are we using them for? Right. Lastly, local applicability. Students talk about the contrast in locations. Here's how Tanzania is like San Francisco, Detroit. They talked about relatable people, how important it was for them to see the people who are doing this research. They talked about local issues. Well, here's how it applies to what's happening in my own neighborhood. So, for example, it says being able to make a change in the area you're in, because I feel like the main issue is people can do stuff in your area, but putting in time, but you're going to have to do things. They're going to have to be having that balance. And also in certain areas, you can still have an impact, but you have to go to certain areas to actually make an impact. So for me, it is a challenge to balance between the two. And we'll close. One student says this: Tanzania is kind of similar. There's a lot of displacement of people because we're kind of considered an urban jungle. There's a lot of gentrification happening, lots of buildings being built. And I've had several friends and families be evicted from their houses, going to get rented out for Airbnb or be demolished so condos could be built. And so it's kind of like in Tanzania, they're creating environments for animals and plants to thrive. And here, they're making an environment for rich people to thrive, right? So students engaging in some really critical analysis. So I'm getting somewhere. Here's the point. For us, these virtual realities empower young people to visit places and take opportunities that they've never had an opportunity to see. Students demonstrated a really powerful ability to learn the concept and apply it in different contexts. And lastly, these virtual field trips really enable them to see the social power of learning. And here's why that's important. Every day when I walk outside, I need them to be able to articulate, here's why it's important for me to engage in action regarding my own local community. I saw what was happening in Tanzania. Now, most people think that's a warm and fuzzy kind of thing, right? But what we know about learning is that if they learn it in that context, it's more meaningful, they will retain that information. So is this a window or is it a wall? You have access to every information available. Even now it's getting worse or better with ChatGPT. But how are we using these things, right? How do students master its features if we don't teach them? And the power of necessity is underappreciated. I, as a teacher, want to create a necessity for explanation, a necessity for analysis, and the young people will learn because they have to. So one of the things I want to say today as I close is we have a tech future, and I would love for you to be a part of that leadership. Technology can be used to promote the type of classroom engaging that actually produces learning. I hope I modeled a little bit of it today. The gold standard for teaching and learning is to be both effective and engaging. You can do both using digital tools. And lastly, technology has the potential to offer the digital diversity. It's going to be almost impossible for us to do in our teaching force. So you can have diverse images right now of people from all across the world engaged in instruction in your STEM classrooms. So what are we going to do about it? I got good news. And the good news is it's your fault, right? And the bad news is your fault. But I hope you can see, the point of today's discussion was that learning is easy if we teach in a way that learning actually happens. And so you made me a promise when we start. This is the first of many conversations that hopefully we'll have together. So I thank you for your time and look forward to your questions.
monitor the chat? Okay. So is this one actually on? It is. Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Brown, for your talk tonight. I am deeply interested, I think, in the question of thinking about your design principles and the integration of the cognitive and the psychological and the social. And I wonder if you could illuminate more about how you see, and I guess I'm thinking of the cognitive as some of the most old school, if you will, how you see that as part of the design of the virtual reality simulations that you shared, and seeing the connection of those kind of from that spaced recall and that kind of body of work to the cutting edge kind of exciting things I see there.
Good. So to rephrase the question is how do we make sure that with the digital tools, we're still engaging and making sure the cognitive capacity components of teaching and learning are still evident? Okay, so it's pretty easy. And this is where I wanted to really start by making sure we centered learning. Learning happens not because you watch something, but because you actually do something with it. So for us, every video has a learning task. What are the things that you notice? Explain the key concepts, make an argument for why this is similar to that. And so there's always a task associated with the video. The video in and of itself is passive learning. It's a little bit more active than most, but unless this is very simple, unless students are explaining, revoicing, and doing, it's going to be very difficult for them to retain the information. So that's always a part of it. I see some of my former teachers in the chat. That's awesome.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate your talk, and your work has inspired me for a long time. One thing I think about is when you're helping new teachers or you're designing things like your videos, of thinking about what's relevant to one student and I get a question a lot of, my students come from all sorts of backgrounds in my classroom. How do I make sure that I'm appealing to all of them and being responsive to all of them? And I was wondering if you could touch on that dilemma a little bit.
Sure. So if my favorite part of that question, I get that question often, is who are you designing for? If not for the students in your classroom. And most teachers will say, well, I'm designing for everyone. Well, which everyone, right? It tends to be they're designing for what they thought was interesting. It's more teacher centered. And so then, okay, let's design for every student by picking a topic you think, I'm gonna use my words very carefully, most students will see regularly. So if most students are going to see the grocery store, but some students, I'm teaching this in a neighborhood where they don't have a grocery store, does that make the content useless? Right? The context is still valuable. And so you do want to make sure. Now, here's a simple adjustment. You can switch context. So in your formative assessment, make sure that you add, well, at the local bodega or liquor store, how does this play out? So now I've added context, right? So I want to say to teachers first, I understand what we're talking about is high-end teaching, and teachers have no extra time to plan lessons. So the curriculum developers need to embed this in their curricular design. People building software need to embed these cues in their design. But I want to make sure everybody knows that you, at least as a teacher, have to say to your young people, this is your space. This is a space for you. Because most of us are aware of all of these kind of negative stereotypes about science. We just don't fight by building communities that are safe, and we are more than capable. So the linear answer is add something else to your lesson to make sure it speaks to everyone. But here's it's a low bar, because culturally relevant applications of science ideas is situated in the culture for many, many, many students. Now, I didn't mention the word race once in this talk. Did I? Did I? Or did I? I don't think I did, right? And I don't, because I teach in communities that are multicultural, and diverse. So I'm designing for that diverse group of people. So the environments you saw, lots of people from lots of cultures, but it is where they lived. And I wanted them to go, okay, oh, I've been to that store. So you're picking places that and context that speak to the young people.
Hi, Isabel I'm a graduate student. Some of the work that I do involves students viewing videos with unscripted dialogue. And one question that I have in a relation or connection I see with your work is featuring student dialogue that is authentic. And so I'm wondering if you sort of see that maybe everyday language featured in those virtual field trips as sort of being a benefit specifically for multilingual students.
So the question was, as everyday language practices embedded in the field trips help multilingual students? So the everyday language, which is what a lot of my work was around originally, is this idea that when I introduce an idea, a science idea, I want to remove the scientific labels just to make sure that the idea is clear, because you're adding a cognitive layer. If you give me a new word and a new idea at the same time, it's just more complicated. So the answer is yes. And for all of our studies, multilingual students perform better when taught with accessible, simple language. And here's why. It's the language that they've learned, right? So we want to make sure the ideas are as accessible as early as possible. And then this is the important part. Then I give you opportunities to use the science language over and over again, so now you can master it. Because what I'm often accused of is, are you, and this is how I know people don't get it. They say, are you trying to dumb down the content? Like, that's the opposite. It is, if I can explain it simply, it takes a higher order thinking. And so now I can make sure everybody understands it, but I'm also making sure that kids have a chance to master language by practicing it. Otherwise, what we're really assessing is whether or not how quickly the kids learn the idea and the language together. And that's a lot of what the problem is. So in these videos, always very simple language, and we have closed caption cues, which helps as well.
Wait, somebody else had a hand raised? Oh, go ahead, sweet. Thank you for your talk. I have two questions. One, can you elaborate? You used the analogy of teachers becoming like a personal trainer. Could you elaborate on that in terms of like how you see that playing out, and especially because that could be very much different than how we think about teaching in general? And then second, these experiences, one could argue, students are doing this outside of classrooms, but we know inside of schools they've been socialized and conditioned in particular ways. And so I'm curious, in your experiences, has there been any transition from what you're trying to do here in terms of what they're accustomed to inside of classrooms? Like, what does that space kind of look like?
So I'll talk about the analogy first. If you're a personal trainer, I apologize for what I'm about to say. One of the greatest jobs ever, you don't actually do anything. You tell the people what to do, but people get strong from doing the work on their own. So similarly, it's not what I'm doing as a teacher, but what the students are doing. So if I go to a classroom to evaluate, I'm looking at what are the students saying, what are they writing, what are they doing? Because that is where the learning is happening, not from the teacher explaining. Now, as a personal trainer, I may have to correct technique, walk over and say, okay, it's not this way, it's that way. So you want to create a time for telling. You want to create the point in instruction where the kids go, oh, I'm not clear, Mr. Brown, what am I supposed to do? Perfect. Tell me what part is clear, right? Two parts, right? This is the part that's clear, okay? And then I offer an explanation, then I can tap in and help them in that in-between space that they're not clear at. This is literally, Vygotsky was trying to tell us this with the zone of proximal development. Like, we want to push the people to the point where there's productive struggle, and then we want to step in. So that's the first part. The second part, people are very much aware of these identity issues, and they do a great job at removing them. Women's colleges produce more female engineers than kind of normative colleges. Well, why? Because you can explicitly say, well, here's how we'll prepare ourselves for engineering careers in a likely unwelcoming place. You can actually be explicit about the psychological challenges. Historically, Black colleges and universities prepare African Americans by saying, well, we're going to prepare you. They're going to remove the psychological barrier by saying, we do this, look at the room, all of us can do it together. So you're removing one of those dimensions of learning by being explicit about it. Tons of programs. One of my favorite is the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. The Meyerhoff program is renowned for being explicit about building the psychological profile of their students. Now, it sounds abstract, but we do it in sports all the time. Coaches are always trying to build the mental state of their young people by saying, we'll prepare you for competition, and here's how you need to think about it. But We don't do it in science and math classrooms. Understanding that society is saying you're not smart enough, it's supposed to be hard, so we have to counteract that. Hope that makes sense.
So I had one question, and then your answer gave me a different question, and now I'm all confused. I was curious with the plain language, I love that. And I'm wondering how you pivot once you introduce a pretty complex concept with plain language, how you then bring in the specific term. It's almost like a flipped Bloom's taxonomy. You're developing a very complex conceptual framework that they're interrogating, and then you just say, this is called that. Is it?
Yes.
Curious.
And then you have them use it.
Right, and then apply it.
Exactly. So check out the work of Rinke, R-I-N-C-K-E, and Olander, O-L-A-N-D-E-R. They have both replicated this study first in Sweden. But I don't understand what's going on in Sweden. But in both, they're Swedish professors, and they've replicated it at the university level using simple language transitions. One of the articles is called "It's Rather Like a Foreign Language," and they're doing it there, just explicitly saying, now use the science term. Exactly. And to me, if I have 100 kids in that condition and they're all practicing the terms, and another 100 kids, we just don't make any affordances for it, then obviously the kids who get a chance to practice the terms and understand they are going to perform better. So it's really not a complicated intervention. It's just that we're not intentionally teaching in the way that we understand learning to work. Which is okay. If you're a college professor, no one taught you this, you're off the hook. Final question? All right, well, Lizzo it is. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.